Bhaskar Sunkara of The Guardian wrote what I think is a fantastic piece outlining the key differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Now, I've tried to do this on the show. I mean, I haven't officially done it, but I've essentially alluded to the fact that I think the main difference between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is that she lacks political courage, and Bernie Sanders is a little bit less willing to back down than she is, because we all know that she sat out 2016 in terms of endorsing Bernie. She refused to come out and speak on the behalf of Dakota Access Pipeline protesters when they were being brutalized by militarized police. So I think that, political courage has been the way that I characterize the key difference between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But what Bhaskar Sunkara does here is he goes a little bit more deeper and gives us a more nuanced take on why the differences between them, even if they're seemingly minimal when it comes to policy, they're still very crucial. Now, I'm going to read you a pretty substantial portion of the article, but I will link to it down below because I'm going to leave out some parts of it, but I want to get to what I think is important because I think this is a very helpful article ahead of the 2020 primary. So, Sunkara writes, arguing between two seemingly good choices can seem from afar like the bickering of two rival fan clubs, but there are significant differences between Warren's and Sanders' approaches to politics and what their respective victories would mean in a country desperately in need of change. To understate things, Sanders' background is unusual. He was trained in the dying remnants of the Socialist Party and cut his political teeth in trade union and civil rights organizing. His lifelong lesson? The rich were not morally confused, but rather have a vested interest in the exploitation of others. Power would have to be taken from them by force. Sanders' message from his early days in third-party politics to today has been remarkably consistent. Back in the early 1970s, he denounced the world of Richard Nixon and the millionaires and billionaires whom he represents. Even back then, he was reminding audiences this is the world of the 2% of the population that owns more than one-third of the personally held wealth in America. Warren's career started as an academic, teaching at law schools and establishing herself as an expert on bankruptcy and consumer protection. Believing that markets fundamentally worked, but the rules of the game needed to be fairer, Warren was a registered Republican until 1995. In the 6 years since she won her Senate seat, Warren has established herself as a credible progressive Democrat, but her background hints at the difference between her more wonkish approach, seeking to construct better policy but not an alternative politics, and the class struggle, worker-centric approach of Sanders. Not surprisingly, Warren has been keen to assure business interests that she believes that strong, healthy markets are the key to a strong, healthy America, and that she is a capitalist. Warren does have significant support among the Netroots Nation crowd, but it's telling that she also appears to be getting traction among prominent Democratic Party policy types. Anita Dunn, Brian Fallon, John Podesta, Neera Tanden, and Matt Iglesias, among others, have had positive things to say about her in the media lately. Sanders, an outsider without ties to many prominent in the liberal politics during the Obama years, gets no such love. Now, this is a really important point to make. If establishment-minded Democrats, Democratic Party loyalists, are praising Elizabeth Warren and feel more comfortable with her, I think that speaks volumes to the type of figure she would be. She wouldn't be a transformative figure, whereas Bernie Sanders, I believe, would be, which is something that they're aware of, and why he scares them so much. Now, Sunkara brings up Matt Iglesias' support for Warren's Accountable Capitalism Act, and even though Sunkara explains that this is actually an ambitious plan, it's not perfect, and it still embodies Elizabeth Warren's pro-capitalist worldview, which kind of demonstrates how Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they may be pretty similar when it comes to policy, functionally speaking, but their worldviews and what guides them are actually pretty different. Now, Sunkara continues, Warren's Accountable Capitalism Act relies on notions of corporate citizenship, and it's clear in her Wall Street Journal op-ed promoting the act that Warren sees neoliberalism as an ideological shift that can be corrected while retaining many of the existing parameters of capitalism. For Warren, U.S. capitalism used to be good. corporations sought to succeed in the marketplace, but they also recognized their obligations to employees, customers, and the community. But then something changed in the 1980s. Building on work by conservative economist Milton Friedman, a new theory emerged that corporate directors had only one obligation: to maximize shareholder returns. But it wasn't a moral failing that brought about neoliberalism, but a structural shift. Corporations in the 1970s couldn't keep up with militant wage demands from unions, the after effect of the OPEC oil shock and increased international competition. Profitability sagged. Without a broader ideological agenda, capital knew that it had to restructure itself and saw labor regulations and unions as impediments. Neoliberal mantras and ideology followed these developments. The only way to undo that U-turn is to rebuild the trade unions and left-wing political movements that could actually bring about a different sort of political economy. And that won't come from the politics of shared responsibility or clever policy initiatives. It'll come from the mobilization of people on the streets and in their workplaces and communities. Sanders is the only candidate that can open up those possibilities. It will be easy for Sanders supporters to spread their vision to people who feel unrepresented by establishment politics. With his relentlessly disciplined messaging, Sanders has communicated to millions exactly what he is about. It isn't corporate citizenship. It's creating a political revolution to get what's rightfully ours from millionaires and billionaires. More and more people are struggling and looking for an alternative. Medicare for all, a jobs program, tuition-free college, and a living wage are all incredibly popular. In large part, this is because of Sanders and the movements he has spent his life supporting and has recently helped revitalize. Whether or not they want to call it democratic socialism, millions of Americans are ready for a political revolution built around their needs. Elizabeth Warren is a progressive who can be an important part of a broad coalition for change, but we need a democratic socialist leading that coalition if we're to deliver it. So I think that this is an absolutely phenomenal piece here by Sunkara, and he really did a good job of articulating the key differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Even if they may seem as if they're alike when it comes to policy, they really are different in terms of their worldviews and what you would get, because even if it's the case that I think many progressives believe Elizabeth Warren would be a good president, well, Bernie Sanders would be a game changer. And what we need now, at a time when Americans are desperate and susceptible to radicalization, we need someone who's a game changer, who will actually give us a political revolution where we have a paradigm shift, where we get back to building up unions and not breaking them down. And getting rid of Trump alone simply won't be enough, because the American public will still be susceptible to radicalization so long as we continue with this neoliberal right-wing way of thinking, economically speaking. But what I fear is that if we get another status quo politician, someone who simply puts band-aids on really huge problems, well, in a few years down the road, Americans could be just as easily swayed by a different right-wing demagogue who comes along and blames all their problems on a different group of marginalized people. And we all know that there's no shortage of right-wing extremists who could just as easily fill the role of Donald Trump. So what's needed is not just good policies, because we certainly need that, but we need a shift in the Overton window. We need a paradigm shift where we move away from Friedman and actually start talking about the ideals of someone like Professor Richard Wolff, where we get back to Keynesian economics, where we get back to FDR level of governing, where we actually have a type of political revolution where we pass policies that are so popular, rapidly so, that they can't be challenged. They can't be challenged in practice and also symbolically, because you're basically showing that you're against the American people. That's how popular the New Deal was. Even Republicans defended the New Deal because they know that if they went against it, they'd be defeated, they'd be crushed. So we need a new FDR, and I think that what Sunkara really gets, to kind of sum it all up, what he gets at is that person is Bernie Sanders. It's not Elizabeth Warren. She's someone who's more of an Obama-type figure, not as bad as Obama, but certainly not transformative. And we need a transformative figure if we want to not just defeat Trump, but defeat the rise of fascism and right-wing radicalism permanently.
Subscribe if you like this video, folks. Mike's tremendous, and he's doing a really, really good job. Many people are telling me about how wonderful the Humanist Report is. Bigly.